Hi, my name is Rolf. I'm from Germany. Online in Perl communities, you might know me as Langs, which is just a funny way to to abbreviate my family name. I want to talk today about placeholders generation in SQL and reversing string interpolation as a mean of metaprogramming. And I want to show some tricks how to achieve this. Let's go on. Let me first give you a small introduction what placeholders are and why they're important in SQL. There's good, there's bad, and there's ugly SQL. This is how we want to have SQL with placeholders. Placeholders are the question marks you can see here after the first. And if you do a prepare of the SQL statement, and then you do an execute, and then you introduce a variable for every placeholder so that it gets put into the SQL. And there are reasons why this must be done. Then there's bad SQL. Bad SQL is Perl has a built-in templating mechanism, a Pullman templating mechanism, if you want, which is very handy, but which can be abused, which is variable interpolation. If you have a string which is surrounded by double quotes, and you have a variable inside of it, a scalar or an array, at this point a scalar $first, it will be introduced into the string, and you have hard-coded the field that you wanted to request. Now, why is this bad? Why do we need placeholders? There are three reasons. First, performance. Secondly, it's auto-quoting. And thirdly, it's security. Performance. If you prepare every time a new SQL statement, like for Clint, for Sawyer, for Ribasushi, the good, the bad, and the ugly, then it's not very efficient, because the prepare is internally doing a lot of performance optimizations and lookups in the tables of SQL. So when you do the final execute after a prepare and the variable are then put in, it's far more efficient. The prepare is costly. Then you have auto-quoting. Suppose you have a name like O'Reilly with a single quote, and you introduce it by variable interpolation. It will break the single quotes around $last as a last name. So you need to always care about quoting it. For the DBI has, I don't remember the function now, but has a quoting function, but it's not so reliable, and it's much better to give it to the placeholders. The third argument is security, and this is the best one. There's a classic from XKCD, Bobby tables. You just introduce a string, which is, you see here you have a single quote too, and you're hijacking the SQL by not checking what is inside the variable. And then you have a totally different SQL, and you have a security issue with that, which is, I think every one of you are aware of this. I hope so. So that's why you have to use placeholders. Now, my talk is about, is the best of both worlds possible? Can I have something similar to this syntax, which is bad, but automatically generates the placeholders and does the execute for me? And this is the sexy SQL which I want to have. And you can see what I introduced here is just a function HMP, which is hold my place. And the single quotes disappeared here and it should then do the prepare with automatically replacing the variable with the question marks, and the execute should automatically include the variables which were in the question marks. So this was the introduction. Now, we need a lot of magic for this. Small magic, bad magic. I had no time to prepare new photos. I wanted to have here pictures of Harry Potter fighting against Dr. Strange, and maybe next time. So the first idea is we need to return an object which is encapsulating all this magic. Then we have to inspect a code block, and then we have to patch DBI to do what we want. Let me go into details. First magic, we return an object. This function HMP, which you can see here, is not returning a string, it's returning an object. But prepare is expecting a string. So there's an object, $O HMP, and in Perl, a scalar can be an object as well. And this is the blessed into a class HMP for hold my place. And the prepare is getting an object. So how is this supposed to work? First of all, we are encapsulating the string which we want to have with the placeholder now, and the variables which have to be put in the placeholder. And this class HMP is overloading stringification, which is here. I don't know who of you has already worked with overloading. Good. And the overload does just return this field, the string field. So this prepare from DBI works out of the box, because the object is, the prepare expects a string and the object is stringified. So it sees the string which we magically created. Sorry, I'm getting confused with reveal.js. Yeah, we've been here before, yes? Okay, so and the prepare works out of the box. Second magic. This was Harry Potter. Now coming to Dr. Strange, reversing the interpolation. What we want to achieve is that we have this query, and we want to have the question marks where the scalars are, the variables. And we want to get the references to the variables. The point is that HMP is not just a function, a normal function, it has a code prototype, which means the first argument is basically a code reference, which is, with the code prototypes, you get this effect that it sees what is in the curlies not as a hash, but as a code block. Now, the point about code blocks is they can have closures, and the variables which are seen inside of the HMP are actually from the closure. This is here. This is here we have two levels of closures. $var2 is 2, $var1 is 1, and we have, when we print this subroutine, this is an anonymous code reference, we get exactly this result. So this is how HMP sees the code block. And thankfully, we have a module on CPAN, which is called PadWalker, and PadWalker gives us two routines, closed over, which gives us all variables which are closed over, like which are just this $first and so on in the SQL. And it also gives us a routine set closed over. So we can manipulate these variables. Furthermore, we need to know, it's not enough that we replace these variables with question marks. We need to know in which order these variables were executed, because afterwards when we do the execute, we want to give the parameters in the right order. This can be achieved by tying the variables. So So which $var was executed in which order, and ties colors gives us a special fetch which solves this. So when we override, when we use this fetch, we get the first argument is the reference to the variable, and we can push it to vars. So we know the variables in which order they appeared, and then we return a question mark. So HMP at the end, this is HMP in the nutshell. We call a routine which goes over all closed over variables in the code reference which we got, and puts them the references of the variables in $var in the array vars, and we execute this code block. And since the variables were overwritten, vars will be filled in with all the, when it's executed, the question marks are returned and the variables are listed. And then we restore what we did so that we don't have funny side effects. And then we return the object with a string which has the question marks and the variables. Third magic, Dumbledore, or I don't know, Gandalf. Patching DBI. Now, DBI gets an object, not a string, and has to handle with this. And we want to patch DBI in a way that is backwards compatible. We still want to have normal prepares, which doesn't use our HMP solution, to coexist without breaking. So we don't want to sabotage legacy code. I already showed you that we don't need to patch prepare because a normal string, because of the overloading that I showed you, the string overloading, it's prepare will only see a normal string, and the HMP object stringifies to a placeholder string. And the nice thing about DBI is it's working with objects, and the STH object, which is returned by the prepare, the statement handle, has a field, if you go into the documentation from DBI, which is called statement, where it stores the statement. And this statement is actually our object. It's not a string. So we can still reference the variables which are stored in the object. So when we do the execute, we need to effectively patch the execute so that an execute, when in the statement handle there is an object of our class, it will expand all the variables to bind them. And DBI offers callbacks. DBI does this out of the box. It has callbacks and it has child callbacks because the STH object is a child of the DBH object. And we have to override the child callbacks, and this is what I did. Child callbacks execute, there I have my execute hook. I can also override the prepare, but I only need this for debugging because I already showed you it works out of the box, but I can do my debugging with that. And with the execute hook, I expand my bind variables. And in a nutshell, it looks like this. My execute hook gets the handle as the object, the $self, the name of the method, and the handle. And I do nothing for legacy code when it's not my HMP object. If it is my HMP object, I continue and I bind the parameters with the bind variables which I had in my HMP object. That was the talk in a nutshell. We have, whoa, it was quite fast. You can, I hope it wasn't too fast. You can ask question or I can give you bonus slides now.
Yeah, can you come back to the tie aspect or the fetch It was not quite clear to me how the time aspect of the variable enter the picture.
No.
No, yeah, it was that, I guess.
Wait a second, with a tie.
Tie, yeah.
This one?
Yes.
Okay. When you tie a scalar, you can tie all variables in Perl.
Mm-hmm.
And the variables become secret objects. So from the outer interface, they look like normal variables. They are used like normal variables. But when you access the variables, they act as objects with special methods like set. No, store. Store is for setting the variable, and fetch is for retrieving and other things. If you have an array variable, there are more methods, but for scalars, it's quite simple. It's fetch and store, and I think delete, I don't know. Yeah, something like that. So, and we need the fetch because we have to call every time the variable is interpolated, we need to know in which order it was interpolated. So every time we imagine an SQL statement with 3 variables, $first, $second, $third. And for each variable, one fetch is called. And this fetch will get all the information which is stored in the object, finally. So does this answer your question, or?
Yeah, more or less, yes.
You can ask, I mean.
No, I mean,
there are people out there, you know, they're looking the video. They are.
Yeah.
They might have the same question.
Okay, so this part was related to change your closure bars to $. Okay, so how does this tie in, forget the pun, with the order of variables? You're using an array to keep the order of the variables.
Yes.
Okay, and what does the tying do in this context?
Well,
okay. Yes.
You have the variables are tied. I'm looking into the closure. I get the variables and I replace them with tied variables.
So every time it is accessed, which is of course in order in the order they appear in the string.
Every time the fetch routine is called.
Yeah, it's fetched. And the fetch routine calls, and as a side effect, it just stores the variable in.
The fetch returns a question mark.
And stores the variable.
But it also records the reference of each variable in the array vars.
In the specific order they appeared in the string. Okay. Okay.
And this is
good.
Encapsulated into the object.
If I understand well, this is a CPAN module named HMP. It's correct?
It's not on CPAN yet. It's an ongoing project, sorry. Yeah, I'm notorious for this, giving nice talks without having the code on CPAN. But I have a good excuse. I'm in the process to be unhired. So it's quite stressy, and good friends for years become a little bit bitchy. So I didn't have much time. I gave the same talk at the German Perl workshop half a year ago, almost the same. I just fixed some typos. And I wanted to have it on CPAN already. I can show you the bonus slides with the things which are also to be considered. But I learned a new word in this conference, which is MVP, Minimal Viable Product. Yes. And I have the tendency, one of my devils is my perfectionism, that I want to cover all edge cases. But I think this edge case alone is, case alone is good enough to justify CPAN module. And there are more cases. It's not only SQL where you have interpolation, where you're interested in automatically quoting and avoiding injections. Are there more questions? Otherwise, I go to the bonus slides. Questions? Okay. No, this didn't work. So I showed you perfectionism. I showed you the solution with simple scalars, but what if we have deep data structures? So we don't need only a fetch to tie scalars, we need to tie arrays and hashes too. Then non-placeholders which need quoting. We can have variable interpolation at places which can't be used with placeholders. For example, if you have a table name or field name which is interpolated, you can't use a placeholder in this. This is an SQL thing, unfortunately. So in this case, I need another syntax. I have to guess from the variable name if this is supposed to be a placeholder or not. Let's say it's all caps. So if it's a variable which for table, or it starts with T for table or F for field, this is a naming convention. And then I have to deal differently with them in the fetch. But this is a thing that I don't know exactly how to do the interface. I will give a default method and leave it to the user to say if you want to have a prefix like F or T, or if you want to have it all caps and things like that. Then nested interpolation. And now it gets really nice. Because we are dealing with objects now, we can have subqueries, which are processed by HMP, which return an object. And if HMP sees its own object inside the interpolation, it can expand them and have expand the placeholders in the right order. And of course, I have to care about performance and caching, because sometimes all this process sounds very expensive. But I have confidence that with memorizing caching algorithms, because if you always see the same string, you can do it quite performantly. So last but not least, PadWalker works with lexical variables, with my variables. If I want to deal with global variables, so I can tell the user, don't use globals, don't use our, don't use $_. Otherwise, I need B modules to pass the op tree. So it's not foolproof, it's not idiot-proof in the way. It's not a way that I can say, the manager can say, oh, we use HMP now, and now our idiot programmers can't do injections anymore. So for this to do, I have to pass the op tree of the subroutine. And this is really nifty thing. I'm not dealing with a string, I'm dealing with a code block. And this goes into functional programming. The funny things I can do with the nifty things I can do with code blocks. So, more questions?
Yeah, a question. I'm not sure whether it is universal in all SQL dialects, etc. But for instance, when normally you can actually quote in, at least in the case of MySQL, for instance, table names and other parts with backticks. So perhaps if one forces that in as a requirement in the string to identify non-value objects like parts of the schema, etc., that might be perhaps a way to differentiate the two kinds of placeholders you want.
No, because when the variable is interpolated, you don't get what is in the string around the variable. You just get the variable name. So it would be best that you don't introduce the backticks yourself, but that the HMP knows by the naming convention this is an identifier which is not a placeholder, and introduces the backticks by itself.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, this is we mentioned the idiot programmers. If I make if I give you a solution where you just drop in your old hazardous SQL and it spits out a good one, it's too good. It's too good a solution. I want the people to think when they use it. So they have to remove manually the backticks, like they had to remove manually the quotes. I can show you, for those which couldn't follow the discussion, if you go back, this is the bad SQL. And here you have single quotes around the variable because it's a string.
Yeah.
But here, when you have the fetch, you can't have single quotes around the question mark. This is the same thing with the backticks. When the backticks are already there, it's quite a little bit dangerous. I prefer to know that it's an identifier which is not a placeholder and introduce the backticks by myself.
Yeah, although of course you can have.
But I can make it configurable by the user.
I mean, you can have single quotes inside $first, for instance. You cannot have backticks in the name of a table in general. So.
Yeah. But this is more an SQL thing, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.